A feature of Sussex, other than the rolling hills and quaint villages and towns, are the proliferation of churches, some of which lay on foundations that are over 1,000 years old and dating back to the pre-Norman conquest. St Peter's Church is a Grade 1 listed building and is one of only 3 churches in the Ouse Valley to have a round 12th century tower. In this ever-changing and rapidly moving world, spaces like this become ever more sacred. They represent not just the sanctity of Christianity, but a perpetual infinite that sits on the landscape, calling to a weary traveller or pilgrim to silence and restful contemplation. So, we're finally here at St Peter's Church, here in Southease. You couldn't get more quintessentially English countryside than this. We have the church, got a few houses around here, and we're not actually even in a village. This is actually a hamlet. And this time of year, we're coming into spring, and the smell in the air of daffodils and all the trees coming into blossom. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Oh, to be in England. This is wonderful. Anyway, we're not here to talk about daffodils. We're here to talk about the history of St Peter's Church. So let's go inside and have a look. Yeah. Oh. Oh, wow. This truly is an ancient church. No mistake about that. We know that this actual, maybe not the structure itself, but the foundations of this church go back at least to 996 AD. So over 1,000 years. In fact, on either side of the church, they found evidence during excavations of the area of what's called a porticus. And a porticus is basically an extension to a church that creates that cruciform shape. And other aspects of service or devotion would be conducted in those. And they're very, very, very typical of Saxon churches. Of course, what we're in now is more Norman. So a lot of what you see is an addition after the Norman conquest. Though saying that, the nave here does date back to pre-Norman conquest. And if you look up here, we can see these murals, or what's left of these murals. These date back to the 12th century. They were actually covered up in the 17th century and only exposed and conserved in the 1930s. But they go back to the 12th century. And it's amazing that we can actually see these. In fact, I'm looking at these and I can see up here the representation of an eagle. And if you look on the other side, I think, down in the bottom here, that's an ox. The ox is a symbol of St. Luke, and the eagle up here, a symbol of St. John. And what's also caught my eye is over here. It's blocked up now, but that is actually a Norman window. And that really does emphasise the point I want to make, which is that from the Saxon period through the conquest period by the Normans, through the 12th century as well, and the 14th century. The archway over the doorway as you come in is from the 14th century. People have been building on this church, modifying it, possibly as faith and people's beliefs are changing and modifying, the environments in which they worship change with it. This font actually dates back to the 12th century as well. But what's interesting about it is that it's actually got quite a bit of damage on it. And it's actually thought that the damage that's on this font could have come from the 16th century during the Reformation, which was basically when Protestantism was born. So, of course, what came with that was iconoclasm and the destruction of a lot of the images that belonged to Christianity and the church prior to it. So this has obviously been knocked about as a part of that process. So this church is completely saturated with history, whether it's knocks and dents in the font, whether it's these murals. It's wonderful. And another prime example, you can see this stained glass window here. And I think it's perfectly obvious that this particular window is not ancient. It's not even what you would call old. Again, emphasising that point that churches are in a constant state of evolution and change. Sites like this aren't static either. There's a whirlwind of history that goes on around them. In fact, Southease itself, including the church that would have been here during the Saxon period, was actually donated to Benedictine monks by the Saxon King Edgar the Peaceful, I think. So that was basically where land that belonged to private landowners was taken by the king and given to the church. That caused a lot of problems later on, where landowners wanted to get their land back after the king had died, understandably. So like I said, history doesn't remain static. There's a whirlwind of history that goes on around us all of the time, and structures like this are a part of that. I always find it amazing to think that the amount of people who've come through that door, they've come here to devote themselves to God. Maybe they've come here for a funeral or maybe even a wedding. This place is literally saturated in the human story. I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. I'm not actually sure how old these particular stained glass windows are, but if you look on the top right, you can see a key row, which is one of the earliest Christian symbols. Of course, this doesn't date back to the early Christians, but it's interesting to see the different symbology and the different motifs in these kinds of windows. Indeed, we have Christ here as the Good Shepherd. Even simple stained glass windows like this, in a very simple, very humble church like this, just gives it that additional touch of the divine, which ultimately is what churches are all about. Lift up your hearts. We lift them up unto the Lord. Let us give thanks unto our Lord God. It is meet and right so to do.
Requodare Domine, qui accidere
Please like and subscribe, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one.